Good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are, and welcome to this joint ADST-DACOR webinar on the upcoming elections in Bosnia-Herzegovina, Perspectives from the Three Constituent Peoples. We have with us today three distinguished keynote speakers representing the three constituent peoples in Bosnia-Herzegovina. They're all university professors and renowned analysts who have also served as advisors to political leaders. Our moderator today, Biljana Jović, director of the Foreign Insight program, and herself a distinguished analyst, will introduce each of them in a moment. I'll just say for our audience, by way of context, that ADST has collected thousands of oral histories from American diplomats covering the 8 decades since World War II. Thanks to Biljana's creativity and enterprise, we've started a pilot program to collect perspectives and views of foreigners on select issues, and joined with our sister organization, DACOR, to bring you these webinar discussions. Let me turn to Biljana Jović, Director of the Foreign Insight Program, to introduce our panelists and moderate our discussion. For our audience, please send us your questions via the question mark. Try to be concise as you can, and DACOR's Keith McCormick will field them and moderate the Q&A portion of our hour this morning. So thank you all, and Biljana, over to you.
Thank you very much, Susan. Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to tune in today's discussion. As Suzanne announced, is going to provide the insight into the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Suzanne already gave some basic information about keynote speakers. You could also see their CVs attached to the invitations that we sent to everybody. Since we have a very limited time, I would just say that they're all scholars, they're all analysts, authors, and diplomats, former diplomats, and I would like to start with the actual discussion. And if you want to know more details, if you need to know more details about their biographies, I would refer you to the information that we provided with the invitation to this program. We have divided the discussion into 4 different segments. This is a big theme. We have a fairly limited time, and we are all very much eager to hear from our keynote speakers today. So let me start with the first theme and with a small introduction that Bosnia and Herzegovina has always been the home to the 3 constitutive nations. They were informally referred to in the former Yugoslavia as Bosnians and sometimes as Herzegovinians, regardless of their ethnic background. Nowadays, even the present terminology, Bosniak Serbs, Bosniak Croats, remains one of the impediments to the Bosnia and Herzegovina nation building, due to its deeper implications for the ownership over the common state. So I would like to ask all our keynote speakers the same question. Given the current level of interethnic confidence, how feasible is it to create a common national identity? And what have been the greatest impediments in this process? If you would allow me, I will start with the lady. Nina, can you please give us your insight, please?
First of all, thank you, Susan. Thank you, Kate, and above all, thank you, Biljana, DACOR, and ADST for this invitation. I sent, and we all 3 of us sent out a paper in which we explain in more detail certain positions about these topics. And I started this paper with quoting a famous, a relatively well-known English scholar, Michael Burgess, who said that nation, nationality, national identity, nation building are all terms that in practice are really highly charged political discourse, and that they have to be taken and handled with extreme care. And this is especially the case in multinational countries, multinational states, multicultural states, however you want to call it, such as the one of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Biljana, unfortunately, I will have to correct you from the very beginning, because what you were referring to before the war as having Bosnians, this was a colloquial term. This was something that was, you know, something used by the people maybe in Serbia or Belgrade. Myself, I am a Serb. I am not a Bosnian Serb. I am a Serb that was born in Bosnia and Herzegovina. That is the territory. But nationality, identity are more than just geographical terms. So this is something, this is part of what we would call something, I wouldn't call it an ignorance, but maybe a less informed approach. When it comes to Bosnia and Herzegovina, we really have to be careful. We really need to have a well-informed approach and not to say an ignorant question. So this question of yours, how you started this whole webinar, is with your question to whom the Bosnia and Herzegovina belongs. Maybe for an average American viewer, this question might seem like a straightforward question. Maybe, you know, one of your viewers might say that Bosnia and Herzegovina belongs to Bosnians. Maybe the one who thinks that's even more informed would say that it belongs to Bosnian and Herzegovinians. Bosnia and Herzegovina belongs to its three constituent peoples: Serbs, Bosniaks, who were until 1993 referred to as Muslims, and Croats, as well as others. Others is the term that we use here, not only in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but we used to use it in former Yugoslavia to denote ethnic minorities. This process of creating one nation or nation building, or one may call it Bosnianization, is the process that didn't start today. This is a process that started in the history, and I'm not going to give, you know, a history lesson here or lecture on Bosnia and Herzegovina, but it's just worth reminding that a similar attempt was done during the Austro-Hungarian occupation. Under this pretext of creating one nation, Bosnia nation, Serbs and Croats mainly were forced to declare themselves as Bosnians of Orthodox or Christian religion. They were banned to use their language. They were forced to call it Bosnian language. Their cultural institutions were closed. This was the pretext, and the real aim of the Austro-Hungarian occupation was to prevent unification of South Slavs, because they saw it as a threat. A century later, we see the same Bosnianization or Bosniakization, if you like, taking place, obviously under the different pretext and for different goals. Bosniaks are trying to impose themselves as the dominant nation here in Bosnia and Herzegovina. They have mobilized all their academia, scholars, politicians, cultural workers to present themselves as the real owners of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And we often hear these terms such as, and under the pretext of creating a functional Bosnia and Herzegovina, or under the pretext of EU integration. This project of Bosnianization or Bosniakization has been advocated by majority of Bosniaks and is often being supported by Western countries, but also by Arabic and Islam countries. You can even hear, and this was something, the theme that you will later on, we will discuss, you can even hear pretexts such as creating a country that needs to be based more on individual rights rather than having federal constitutional architecture. These are all the reasons that we are, you know, the pretext is that we have been hearing. The ultimate goal is obviously to create a country what we call here one man, one vote state, in which Serbs and Croats would be marginalized, and they would become minorities, if you like, even though they are as legitimate owners of Bosnia and Herzegovina as Bosniaks. Often you also hear that Bosnia and Herzegovina is a complicated country. And then you would hear that we have, I don't know how many ministers, etc. And there is a tendency, not only in the academia, but also obviously in political discourse abroad, to completely ignore the fact that there are a couple of Western countries, Western democracies, that are based also on a rather complex model, and that have managed with a relatively good success to accommodate all the different identities, cultural and national identities.
Nina, I'm sorry.
We need to.
I apologize.
Okay,
we are very limited with time. I have to stop you here, and then we can go back to this under some other.
I'm just gonna finish this idea of creating one nation of Bosnia and Herzegovina is a really slippery slope. That can bring the country to not stability, but to a lot of uncertainties. Thank you. I'm sorry I took a lot of time.
Thank you. Thank you. Dražen, what's your opinion about this issue?
Well, it's to a high degree. I agree with Nina. Obviously, I mean, it's just a commonsensical view that there are three constituent peoples, and even under the preamble to the Dayton Constitution, Bosnia is composed of three constituent peoples plus others. Now, today, just a couple of important remarks. Today, the relations, the inter-ethnic relations, are worse than ever, and that's really a strange thing. That's a really strange thing. Meaning that, and the territories on which the ethnicities, the particular ethnicities reside today, are cleaner than ever. So a majority of Croats live in a compact, clearly defined, delimited area in Western Herzegovina and a part of central Bosnia. Serbs predominantly live in Republika Srpska. You have only something like 5,000, not more, Serbs in the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And then on a 24% of the inner Bosnia, there is this Bosniak Muslim constituent people. That's the first thing. The second thing is that really we have a constitution. So I tend not to take lightly, or I tend to avoid any discussion that is not based on tangible factors. Meaning, if our constitution provides and forces the three constituent peoples with their constituent national rights, then we should base our considerations primarily on that. Americanization of Bosnia is a relatively old idea. I don't know, in 2009, we hear, for instance, the president, he was vice president then, Biden, saying that we are your project, meaning America is your project, meaning that Bosnia should become in the future something like a mini America. That's a very wrong take, absolutely wrong take. I mean, because Bosnia and Herzegovina has exactly, I will tell you how many Bosnians, the people that define themselves as Bosnians, apart from any ethnic demarcation, any ethnic designation. It's a 3 or 2, maximum 4% of Bosnians, and not more. And this is the category of others, really. It's not the category of a special nation. Now, apart from that, I am a Bosnian Herzegovinian, meaning that this is my citizenship, right? This is my country, my state. I have some rights in this country as a Croat based on the constitution of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And of course, I don't want, and it's beyond my imagination to try to impose some special identity on somebody who doesn't want to have it, to have this as his or her clout. I mean, why should I impose on Bosnian Serbs an identity that they do not consider as theirs? Well, it's nonsense. Of course, there are political issues and political manipulations. We hear, especially in the Bosnian Muslim political circle, And relatively recently, we've heard that from Bakir Izetbegović himself, the son of Alija Izetbegović, the wartime leader of Bosniak Muslims. We've heard the following remark. There is a fourth nation in Bosnia, and this is like the nation of people who especially care for Bosnia in contrast to the others. Now, this is like, you know, being discriminated against, and this is like being put into a special minority, hole, I would say, and being a kind of, you know, treated as if, you know, you don't have rights that are specifically enumerated in the Constitution to Bosnia and Herzegovina, meaning election rights, meaning the rights of representation, meaning the rights of governance, participating in the three classical branches of government, and of course in the NGO sector as well. So that's all I have to say on this issue.
Thank you very much, Dražen. What's your opinion about this, Adnan?
Well, thank you so much, Biljana, and thank you for having me here. First of all, I would like to clarify several things, which I think are going to provide a little bit of different perspective on things. When we talk about Bosnia and Herzegovina today, we're talking about a country which suffers from I would say decades of bad governance, a country which suffers from a high level of dysfunctionality. We have virtually non-existent rule of law, and this doesn't apply only to power sharing elements or power sharing levels of this country, the state and the federation. In this case, it's equally the case with Republika Srpska, which is heavily centralized, yet it remains in absolutely every sense. When we look at the even the I would say the basic elements of democracy, very much lagging behind in the sense in terms of freedom of media and especially in terms of socioeconomic indicators. We have a situation where since 2013, right, until 2018, around 420,000 people from Bosnia got permanent residence in the European Union. So we're talking about at least 500,000 people who left this country over the course of 5 years, and the numbers are only going to get higher as we move towards relatively uncertain, I would say, winter this year. We have a permanent conflict that's been brewing since at least 2006, since opening of this discussion about the future of the country, triggered by the, first of all, the American departure, I would say, or shifts in American focus when it comes to Bosnia, or shift away from Bosnia, and then handing over Bosnia to Europeans roughly in 2006, which triggered numerous crises, right? Because we have, I think we got very close to reforming the country in constitutional sense in 2006, and this is probably the maximum we could achieve. Ever since, the positions of the political actors were becoming more and more divergent, and now we are in a situation where the consensus is virtually non-existent. So to ask first, I mean, first your question about the creation of a nation. I don't think this was ever attempted. You know, Nina mentioned some historical references to this from the Austro-Hungarian period. The period after 1996, the period of active international involvement, was not about nation building. It was about a state building. It was about institution building, and this is something that the internationals were pushing very hard. How successful was it? You know, it's open to interpretation, and we can discuss it at great length. You know, but I mean, not to justify or not to look for excuses, you know, in terms of what was done wrong. Let me put it this way. Bosnia was a unique case happening at a very specific time at the end of the Cold War. Bosnia was first such examples in international relations of such a heavy involvement of international actors. And of course, it was very much Western dominated. Now the situation has changed. And I think what we actually, and I will come back to something that Dražen said, I think what we need right now, and I'm immediately going to offer something to discuss about the future, right? Because the future looks bleak for Bosnia. I think that the only way we can move forward is basically by establishing at least commitment to the law and constitution of this country, and of course to the rights of all the elements which are creating the structure. Something that you have in Germany, which is called Bundestreue, or commitment to the Bund, you know, to the federal level, in the sense that you or none of the constituent element, in this case both entities or cantons in the federation, will make any decisions which are jeopardizing or are affecting negatively the others or the common state. And I think this is as far as we can go. And I think this is the only feasible alternative to the situation we're having right now. However, I think what we're missing right now, what we're missing as an ingredient, is stronger international involvement in this sense. There is no interest. I mean, we are perfectly aware of the fact that there is no interest as far as Bosnia is concerned anymore. We know that the interests are you know, the focus is elsewhere, and this is perfectly understandable. But I think it's also, Bosnia is, you know, is emblematic of certain changes in global and regional dynamics. And in this sense, I think helping us move away from the current problem or the current disagreement is going to pay off in the end. How we're going to get there is a different issue altogether. But I think that, you know, first of all, I think only working along these lines by accepting the framework as is and the respect for the institutions and the rule of law is the way forward or way out of the situation.
Thank you very much. Do you have any comments? Do you want to add something? Oh, both. I will start with Dražen now. Dražen, please.
Yeah, I mean, 2006, Adnan said, you know, the America departed and European Union, whatever. Right? That's not true. I mean, the Americans have remain. They are the actual America. United States of America is actual manager in control of the process in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and has remained so since the day one. So just let me demonstrate why I think that the American influence was bad on Bosnia, and especially in terms of identity. Okay, in 2005, Richard Holbrooke delivered so-called Dayton Peace Prize speech, right? And here is what he says on ethnic difference or ethnic identities in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I quote, when we say ethnic, it's just a fancy name for racism. Racism, which by the way, is not based on any racial difference. There is no difference between Muslims, Croats, and Serbs. They went their different ways through the history of the last 800 years in the Balkans, but they all intermarried, they all came from the same plains and so on. This means that Dick Holbrooke denies my identity as such. You understand that? So he says, very strangely, he is an architect of the Dayton Constitution. But regardless of that, he says that the key elements of the Dayton Constitution are fictions. And that's the key of the problem. That's one of the problems that America, I'll explain that later in our discussion. That's one thing. The second thing is really that constitutional fidelity, or the Bundestreue, as you call it. I mean, it's something that is missing from the day one. The problem is that the Constitution of Bosnia and Herzegovina was implemented under a revision. I mean, there were so many impositions by the high representatives thus far that the constitution that is now implemented, it is part of Bosnian Herzegovinian reality. That's not the original constitution that was adopted in Dayton in 1995. That's a key issue. And Croats suffered a lot, and Serbs especially suffered a lot as a consequence of that. And that was all done, really, I mean, to promote, support the interests of Bosniak Muslims. We know that.
We'll look into the international role a bit later. We have a special section of the discussion on that. Thank you very much. Nina?
Just quickly, just to add on the terms, it's also called federal spirit, what two of you were talking about. And we can talk about it later on when we say how to move forward. I'm just going to give quick comments, 2 comments or 3 comments on what Adnan says. I didn't say that after the war there was a process of formal official process of creating one nation, Bosnian nation. This was done exactly under what you've mentioned, the pretext of creating functional, or sometimes they even call it democratic country.
Yeah.
I will just give you, we often hear the stories how Bosnia and Herzegovina is not functional, how institutions don't work. I'm just going to mention you two crises. One was the floods in 2014, and the one was the corona crisis. We had central level involved in both crises, but the central level failed. At the end of the day, it was the entities who took the charge of the situation and did what they did. So we often tend to neglect that. And obviously, there is no rule of law at the moment. There is no rule of law simply because some Bosniak ministers are completely ignoring the existence of constitution, especially in the foreign policy. So I'm just going to stop here. I'm not going to go, I'm not going to take more of that.
Thank you very much. One of the highly politically contested issues is how successfully we have faced the past. And we all know the role that ICTY played. You know, we can discuss whether it has been successful or not. But what's your opinion about the greatest challenges in facing the past genuinely and reaching the level of inter-ethnic reconciliation? And how can we have this process depoliticized? Adnan, I will start with you now.
Thank you. I think I was in the preparatory part for this. I was, you know, fairly negative, and I think that the overall tone of my responses was negative from the start. I think, first of all, I don't think that that the reconciliation was ever seriously attempted in Bosnia. If we accept the fact that it was internationally administered for at least 10 years, effectively. Why this was not done is beyond me. I know of some attempts to discuss different models, the model of Northern Ireland, German model of Vergangenheitsbewältigung, talking about all the different ones, but never really, even South African model, but never really trying anything in a systematic manner. I think that what was a widely held belief was that the ICTY itself, as an ad hoc court, will be able to collect the evidence and, in a way, present the factual reality, the reality based on evidence, which is then going to be used or will be instrumental in achieving this, in achieving reconciliation ultimately, and rebuilding trust between communities. And unfortunately, this was not the case. The rejection of the ICTY for various reasons on part of all three communities was such that didn't really allow for any of that to trickle down or somehow to capillarly enter into narratives which are being perpetuated. So we have a situation nowadays where the war criminals are glorified, where the events are now interpreted the way I want, not the way the court actually found this to be the case. And the process cannot be depoliticized. The reason is very simple, because this process is exactly what the current set of ethnic elites thrive on. Having them as drivers of the process is irrational to expect. What you're asking them to do is to remove, first of all, a lucrative element of something that has been keeping them in power for more than 2 decades now. And the second one is to remove a permanent smokescreen to really bad and lousy governance, widespread corruption, and the fact that leaders of these three communities, political leaders or most prominent leaders, are criminals. are your transitional criminals. You know, this is the way it works. In every normal country, these people wouldn't be occupying the positions they have. But in Bosnia, this is obviously a clear indicator and signal that there is no rule of law and that justice is not a firm principle.
Thank you, Adnan. Dražen, what's your opinion?
Well, I partly agree with Adnan, if I understood him correctly, and he said that, you know, the reconciliation process was never seriously attempted in Bosnia and Herzegovina or in the other bodies that dealt with Bosnia and Herzegovina in a relevant way. Now, obviously, there is this preconception as follows: Bosniak Muslims are the victims of the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina from 1992 to 1995. Bosnian Serbs are the key aggressors. They launched an aggression against Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Bosnian Croats are somewhere in the middle. They are baddies, but not too much as Serbs. This is absolutely untrue image. This is totally false image of the war. It doesn't deal with the causes of the war. It doesn't deal with the constitutional concerns. It doesn't deal with the end, in the way that the war ended. I mean, look at the way the war ended. The war ended by a classical compromise, right? Very classical compromise. Serbs won their own entity, in a way, their own, and Serbs and the Bosniak Muslims and Croats created another entity. And then the two entities decided to try to recover Bosnia and Herzegovina through the joint institutions. That's one thing. The second thing, very influential influence, is born in Bosnia and Herzegovina through the ICTY, which is the International Criminal Tribunal Court, International Criminal Tribunal Court for former Yugoslavia, placed in The Hague. And this court, which has ended its work, I mean, there is this residual mechanism, but the court decision, the court judgments, the court rulings were exactly as I told you at the very beginning. Croats are baddies, so Serbs are the key baddies. They are genocide makers, and the Bosniak Muslims are innocent victims of the war. Now, to tell you the truth, I just accidentally looked like a few days ago at Wikipedia data, very simple data, on Bosnian Croats, on the war crimes that Bosnian Croats suffered on the hands of Bosniak Muslims. That is what the Bosniak Muslim Army, BH. How many, do you know how many war crime cases there were committed, that are committed against Croats, Croat population, civilian population, by the army BIH, which is the Bosniak Muslim Army? 30 cases. Today, Croats memorize one special case of Grabovica, where 33 persons were murdered in cold blood, the youngest child being 4-year-old, right? 17 bodies were never found. Now, despite that, Croats are baddies. They are those who participated in the joint criminal enterprise. And who do you think, who has projected such an image of Bosnian war? America predominantly, through the ICTY. So the ICTY was never meant to be, or intended to be, the body that would promote reconciliation. It was the body whose primary function was to continue war after the war, to add more hate and to misrepresent the Bosnian war in such a way that then some special political claims can be justified post facto, after the war. So that's the key thing, and that's, as I said at the very beginning, the inter-ethnic relations within Bosnia are never worse. Of course, we do have corrupt politicians, corrupt parties, but apart from that, there is this substance of Bosnia that is unfortunately, I think, so mixed up and so screwed up, I would say today, that, you know, I don't see, not only that I see a bleak future for Bosnia, as Adnan said, I see no future for Bosnia. We'll come back to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Nina, how about you? What do you think about this issue?
Well, as a Serb, if I start to talk about ICTY decisions, I would be immediately accused of being, a nationalist or whatever. But so I'm just going to refrain. I think Dražen said enough. Just to add on something that Dražen mentioned on this myth if you like. In Bosnia and around Bosnia and about Bosnia, there are so many myths throughout the history and even today. And then there is this myth that, you know, the civil war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the latest one, that the biggest victims are Bosniaks, Muslims. And I know that Adnan maybe react on this, but there are so many reasons to conclude that even they built part of their identity on this victimization process. I don't like to bring figures, especially when it comes to people, but I will have to here. When you look at the census that was done in 1991 and in 2013, whether it's a legitimate census or not, I will just tell you, 133,000 Bosniaks are missing or are not accounted for. 216,000 Croats, 270,000 others, and almost 280,000 Serbs. These are the figures between.
When you say missing, people who
I mean, not missing, but not missing. This is what the census says. When you this is like in absolute numbers. When we are talking about the percentage after this war, the situation is that the Bosniaks are now represent 50.1% of the population, and before the war they represented 43%. Croats represent only 15.4%, and before the war they represented 17%. Serbs represent today 30%, and before the war they were something in between 32 and 33%. I'm just giving you the figures, the food for thought, and I'm not going to go into discussion of this is a very painful topic for the people back home, but and you know, there is the tendency in the West and in the literature to view Bosnia and Herzegovina as little Yugoslavia, referencing that we all lived happily ever after before, that the fact is that whenever peoples of Bosnia and Herzegovina had the chance to fight against each other, they really seized that chance. They did it in the First World War, they did it in the Second World War, and they did it in the last war. What is also missing from the discourse is the fact that Dražen tried to mention a little bit, but I'm just going to elaborate it a little bit more, is this, and there are just a couple of authors that are talking about this, and this is this alliance formation, inter-ethnic alliance formation. During the Bosnian wars, we had Serbs and Croats fighting against Muslims. We had Muslims and Croats fighting against Serbs, and vice versa. We even had, in one part of Bosnia, Muslims fighting against each other. So this is really something that we need to take into consideration when we are talking about reconciliation. Another point is that what is reconciliation? How do we define it? And I'm just going to try to finish maybe this theme a little bit more optimistic. I was really, really young in 1997. I started to work as an interpreter for the United Nations mission in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And we went to Travnik, which was divided between Bosniaks and Croats. I'm really going to be very short. And we had a Bosniak Muslim Minister of Interior, and his deputy was a Croat guy. They understand each other the same way as the Americans understand British. However, they didn't want to talk without the interpreter. So imagine now we are having all this time somebody translating lift to elevators and etc. etc. This is the reality. So nowadays, Dražen, myself, Adnan, we would speak the same language. We would understand each other. We would do it without interpreter. It's not that nothing has been done, but the models of Germany and France cannot be applied here for various reasons. And even if you go to the border between Germany and France, the reconciliation, I mean, there are still tensions present there to a certain degree, you know. So I don't think that this process of the reconciliation was all bad. It's true that some people maybe you know, saw it more as a chance to open up several institutions, the NGOs, etc. But I don't think that is as bad as sometimes we think of it. Just try to be honest to ourselves and look 20, 25 years ago, how was the situation? You know, we couldn't, for example, we couldn't have the session of the presidency without the intervention of the OHR. We couldn't, Dražen knows this because he was working at OHR at that time. So basically it was the OHR who was, you know, checking if the agenda of the presidency or the council of ministers was okay. We don't have that. I mean, okay, the trust is not as high as it should be, but it's not that the whole process was as bad as it might seem. Thank you.
Thank you. Adnan, you wanted to comment about some of the remarks.
Yes, I didn't quite understand Nina's reference to this percentage, what you were trying to say with this. But let me just say something first about the ICTY in general. What is clear is that had it not been for ICTY, we wouldn't have any process whatsoever of dealing with the crimes that were committed on the territory of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Had it not been for the fact that there was ICTY, we would not have any methodical and rigorous, legally rigorous process which actually established certain facts. It's still better than anything which would be alternative. Rejecting ICTY is extremely dangerous. Rejecting ICTY, invalidating ICTY and saying this was an element of Western imperialism or anything similar, something that was a political court of the sort, I think puts us into two different camps immediately. Because if we are rejecting this, then there is no starting point for anything. So that's something I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, as I mentioned, this is a highly contested issue, and we could probably dedicate one whole conference to this issue. But we have to move on, and I will ask you. You know, you all mentioned the international leverage that has contributed or to where Bosnia is today. So, how do you see the role of international community up to now and in the future? But I will have to ask you to be very brief, because then we want to spend more time on the way forward. Let me start with Dražen now.
Yeah, okay. I published one book called Peace as War. This is the book. This is the book, Peace as War. Bosnia and Herzegovina post-date. It's published by the Central European University Press. It's in English, and basically it gives you an overview of the entire Dayton Peace implementation process, Dayton Peace Treaty implementation process. And of course, the international community is the key factor. I mean, you cannot really have, we couldn't have had anything of this over the last 27 years without the international community. And even the war, most of the war was steered, guided, controlled by the international community to a great extent. By the international community, I don't mean like the worldwide, something like, you know, citizens of the earth. No, I think of very clear factors. Like one is the United States of America, then the United Kingdom, and a couple of strong European nations, European states, like the Germany, which followed America most of the time, France, which opposed from time to time, but slightly, and that's about it. Russians watching all that from aside, because Russians were not as strong then as they are today. I mean, it would have been different if Russians were in the play with the capacities that they have now. Now, there was one key element and key means, which was and still is, the High Representative of International Community. And the High Representative is basically the dictator of Bosnia and Herzegovina. That is the figure, that is body, that has unlimited powers, according to how it was used and created in 1987, approved to act in such a way by the international community, by the so-called Peace Implementation Council in 1998. And that body is basically to blame for most of the problems that we have today in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Why? Because it effectively changed the meaning of the Dayton Constitution. It applied it in a special way, which deviated significantly from the original text. And I have proved that. I've demonstrated this, all this in my book. So if you need more argument, more detail, please, take this book and read it. It's 300 pages, and it goes through all the key parts of the Dayton Peace Agreement, all the key aspects of the Dayton Peace Agreement. Even it's arguable that the High Representative itself, with unlimited powers, or as a body that was given unlimited powers by the international community, that is in violation of the Dayton Constitution and the Dayton part, an extent that deals specifically with the High Representative. Now, actually, the current problems with the High Representative are very illustrative of the problems that we had with the international community over the last 27 years, which, as you know, this is a huge problem. Today, we have in Bosnia and Herzegovina an illegal High Representative, right? This is a German diplomat, Christian Schmidt, who has come to Bosnia and claims to be the High Representative. And some countries support his claim, and some countries do not support his claim. Now, there is this important issue, namely, under the Annex 10, there is a specific procedure that needs to be respected. You need to take the candidate, first you agree on the names of candidates. The candidate must come from the European Union. That's the first requirement. And the second requirement is really that the candidate needs to pass through the Security Council. In other words, the Security Council needs to confirm the nominee. That is how the process was done with all the high representatives thus far. Every single one, including Valentin Inzko, including Paddy Ashdown, all of them were approved and nominated and approved by the Security Council. Adnan says no. Yeah, I mean, take Wikipedia and see for yourself. Now, there is an important issue here, because if you start with a situation in which a high representative has no backing of two actually major powers, People Republics of China and the Russian Federation, you basically introduce a conflict into Bosnia. You understand why do you introduce the conflict? Because you introduce a body that is really that tends to spread conflict globally, and whatever the body does, this will be questioned, taken as problematic by Russian Federation, by People's Republic of China, and by Serbs, and also by Croats to a great extent.
Thank you.
So this is the key issue. This is the key issue, and it remains so. I mean, it's really, apart from that, we had like Paddy Ashdown, late Paddy Ashdown, who sacked in one day 60 Serb officials from the Republika Srpska positions, banned them effectively. This was taken as an atrocity by the Council of Europe when it happened, and it happened in 2002, 2003. Russian Federation said, we will cease cooperating with you, Mr. Ashdown, and this was a big deal, but what I'm suggesting is that basically the decision did not really help Bosnia and Herzegovina. It actually created more heat than was in place before. So that's welcome.
Thank you, Dražen. Nina? What's your opinion about this?
Well, I could agree with many things that Dražen said. I'm just going to try to be very brief to leave space and time for Adnan. I will just start with the fact all three of us are professors, and if we were to teach international relations in the United States, we would have difficulty to explain our students what the international community is. I have no problem explaining that to my students, even to my 10-year-old nephew. This just goes to say that international community, in the form that Dražen has mentioned, has been affecting our lives since 1995 and even before that. International community, don't get me wrong, did an excellent job of stopping the war. And nobody denies that. International community was involved in the process of rebuilding the country, bringing us all to the table. But what international community failed to do was to back off. So when these two ministers that I mentioned earlier finally decided to talk without interpreter, international community should just leave the room. And it didn't, for various reasons. This has created, the so-called bone powers, which are, as Dražen mentions, and there is a huge debate whether the bone powers given to the high representatives were given on legal basis or not, and how are they in violation of the Dayton Peace Agreement, have been used and abused to impose laws. So imagine we are talking about a country that is now, we are in 21st century, a country that is a potential candidate for European Union, a country that has a seat in the United Nations, exactly. And the country is European country. I'm not trying, don't get me wrong, but I'm just giving you all the facts. And the country is being run by a foreigner, basically run. And you have a constitutional court that Dražen forgot maybe to mention, where you have foreign judges. Just imagine that. You have foreign judges who come from completely different legal background. They have studied different laws than ours, and they are deciding. And often, in most of the cases, because these decisions are being made by how you call it, majority, yeah. Yeah, and they are most of the time Serb and Croat judges are being outvoted. I'm just giving you some facts. So what has this created? This has created, I would call it pseudo or quasi-protectorate, but Dražen would probably call it a full protectorate, a situation where actually the OHR has become an additional center of legislative and executive rights. And as a consequence of that, principles of consensus, or this atmosphere of having a consensus among the three constituent peoples, has completely being ignored. And this political culture of dependence on foreign, not only interest or not foreign influence, but basically giving foreigners a job to do the work for ourselves. The moment when it was said that one of the conditions to close one of the conditions to have the candidate status for Bosnia and Herzegovina there was some point that we have to get rid of the OHR. What is sometimes often being neglected when we are talking about international engagement, and I'm just going to finish here, is their accountability and responsibility. International community in Bosnia and Herzegovina is accountable to nobody. Nobody.
Dictatorship.
They come here, they do their work, they most of the time leave mess. There are so many wrongdoings and mistakes that were made, and they are accountable to nobody. Some of them, and there are evidences to suggest that, have been given very nice houses on certain lakes in Bosnia and Herzegovina by Bosniaks as a reward of doing and protecting their interests. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. But they do have reports that they submit to the UN Security Council, don't they? I mean, so they are formally accountable to the UN Security Council. Adnan, you had a few reactions to the remarks by your predecessors.
Yes, just one thing. First, a correction. There was one high representative who was never confirmed in the UN Security Council, and that was Christian Schwarz-Schilling. So the procedure was never done, which never in any way prevented him from either being accepted as such or basically doing his task. Second thing relates to, in general, I would say the leverage of international community in Bosnia, which indeed is no longer what it was. It is still present. You know, as Nina said, it's part and parcel of our political life, of the fabric. But I would have, and I have actually slightly longer memory than just the beginning of active international involvement. at the very beginning of the implementation of the Dayton Peace Agreement, you actually had severe restrictions, especially from the Serb side, when it comes to not only convening meetings of the presidency and the parliament, but making any decision whatsoever. To a large extent, and I'm not justifying, I mean, I understand what is the nature of Bosnia today, what this got us into, but I'm not justifying the actions of the international community either. But I think that there was a vested interest in Bosnia to try to make it work. And the beginning of active international engagement, which got out of hand eventually, with all these things that Dražan mentioned, sacking people, imposing laws, and so on and so forth, has gotten out of hands eventually completely and left a lasting mark on the way we function today as a society. So in this sense, I have to go back to one final point, the Constitutional Court. I mean, the judges are appointed by the President of the European Court of Human Rights. I mean, if there is in any way, and I invite all of you to actually look at their CVs before making them either agents of the Bosniak side or anything else. For the most part, we're dealing with people who are outstanding legal experts. For the first, which is not something that we have, especially when you realize that the discussions almost inevitably on all major issues break down along ethnic line, which I think is indicative of I would say, the lack of legal dimension to it, and ethics and professionalism, and much more indicative of handling it solely on the political and ethnic basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Adnan. Dražan, you had a reaction?
Yeah, I have a very strong reaction against three things, all the three that Adnan mentioned. First of all, there is a very important reason why Christian Schwarz-Schilling was one who was not confirmed by the United Nations Security Council. And the reason is that Christian Schwarz-Schilling was meant to be the last high representative in Bosnia and Herzegovina. It was decided by the Peace Implementation Council that the office will be closed, and that this is the last. Just let me finish. That this is the last, and Russia said, okay, if that's the case, we'll let him work. That's the first thing. The second thing is that you say on the Constitutional Court of Bosnia and Herzegovina, you say all the wonderful scholars are there. I checked the CV of the Macedonian judge there, who is now working at the court. The lady worked in Soros Foundation. She was basically smuggled to the court by the Soros channels. That's the key thing. Look at the cleaning lady. The cleaning lady. The Constitutional Court members are appointed by political parties in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Everywhere.
And as the you have this cleaning lady from Tuzla, who has gone through the SDA channels and is now the Supreme Court judge. And
okay. Well, we will not go there.
What I'm telling you is that this is, that's.
We are running out of time. If you could just, Nina, just one sentence, please. One sentence.
Yeah. Just when it comes to the Schwarz-Schilling, I'm not going to read the whole letter of the President of the Security Council, but that just the last one, from the 2014 and 4. Has been brought to the attention of all the members of the Security Council. They welcome the decision of the Peace Implementation Council. They also wish to express their appreciation of Lord Ashdown for his invaluable contribution. So it's not true that the Security Council of the United Nations, as it is presented, I'm sorry, Adnan, mostly by Bosniaks, this is not the truth. There is a letter signed by Augustin P. something. I'm not going to read the whole letter, that clearly says that this decision was discussed at the Security Council and that all members of the Security Council welcome his appointment. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, diversity of opinion on these issues show how difficult the issues are that have to be resolved in Bosnia and Herzegovina. But now it's time to speak about the way forward. And now, since we have spent a lot of time discussing these issues that we have different opinions about. I would ask you to give me your view of the way forward in 3 sentences. I'll start with Nina.
Just quickly, I think we talked about it. One decision, one way forward is to create this environment that would accommodate what in the UK Federalists called federal spirit. And one way of doing that really, as was done, for example, in Belgium, is to create these mechanism of coordination, ad hoc mechanism of cooperation, basically forcing all levels of the government to work together. This was already done, not as good as it should be with the EU coordination mechanism, but there is even in the constitution a room to do that. So, but not pretending that we are doing something on behalf of others. When we are talking about constituent peoples, it's not just that they need to feel as Serbs or Croats or Bosniaks or however you want to call it. They really need to be elected by Croats, Serbs, and Bosniaks. And if we have, as is the case, for example, today in the presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina, if we have Željko Komšić who feels as a Croat, he genuinely feels that he's a Croat, but he hasn't been elected by the Croat votes. He has been elected by Bosniaks simply because they can do that, simply because the election law allows Bosniaks. Something like this could never happen, for example, in a culture where we respect each other, like the one in Belgium. You know, a Flemish person would never lie that he's a Francophone just to fill in the places. And this is not only at the level of the elections. We have, you know, at any level that sometimes, you know, even at the level of the federation, the entity, you would have Bosniaks who would 1 year declare themselves as Bosniaks. Then if they need to get a new position, then they would declare themselves as Serbs or Croats. And this is really the abuse of what we call here ethnic key or ethnic balance. Another, so this is the second model. And then the third maybe step to do it is really to let Bosnia and Herzegovina and its 3 constituent peoples and the others have the full ownership of the country. I'm not saying that we can be completely independent. I'm not an idealist. I'm not thinking that we cannot, you know, that the Americans or other forces will not have the influence over Bosnia and Herzegovina, but really to let Bosnia and Herzegovina being governed by people of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Today, we have people who work in international community who are meddling in daily affairs. So who gets, you know, who was given this position? How about this project? Who won this project? And let me finish with this. International community has been in Bosnia and Herzegovina for a very long time that there should be a mechanism where elements of the corruption within the international community should be also investigated. Thank you.
Thank you. Dražen?
Well,
3 sentences, please.
I will not elaborate. The matter, I mean, what Nina said about Željko Komšić, this is so like, you know, idealism, and it should be a matter of law. It shouldn't be like a matter of some respect, you know. That's a key issue. And there is a named person who imposed the law on Bosnians and Herzegovinians. Briefly speaking, unlike Nina, I am much more of a pessimist. I mean, you know, the warlike state condition of political relations in Bosnia, that wasn't preserved just like that. You know, they are not really benevolent, Nina. Maybe you have like this, I don't know, would like to open the door to everyone. It's a spirit of inclusion, like, you know, quasi-American. I don't think this is really for our own good. And it's really, I mean, people are leaving the country economic state is, you know, collapsing. You know, people are leaving the state, emigrating heavily, and the inter-ethnic relations are worse and worse and worse. I mean, I don't think that we will fight a war, real war, but it's the country is like it's a quasi entity. It's really something that it may exist, doesn't have to. Nothing would really change if the country collapsed and self-destruct, so to speak, self-destructed or was disintegrated. Nothing would.
That's very gloomy. That's very gloomy, and I'm sure that we're going to have some questions in the Q&A part.
My perspective, yeah.
In this regard.
Yeah, I was concise.
Thank you. Adnan, what's your opinion about the way forward?
I mean, I cover, and I would underline most of the things that Nina said. There is an obvious need to, unfortunately, because of the cases that she mentioned, which are really problematic cases, not only Komšić, but especially the elections to the House of Peoples and the abuse of these elections by especially Bosnian politicians. I mean, even if you check the names right now, you will have them in the House of Peoples, in the Federation, in both Serb and the Croat caucus. And this is a terrible case of undermining the very principles upon which the confidence was supposed to be rebuilt. What I think is going to be problematic, even though I agree with most of the things Nina said, is providing for these mechanisms of cooperation. Unfortunately, we have fora are there, different ways and means through which the decisions can be made. However, this is no longer the case. Most of these are either blocked completely or made dysfunctional. So it's going to be very difficult. And I don't think that the model is actually the problem, or the framework is the problem. I think that the political will, no matter how elusive this might sound, is actually the issue. But I have to say one thing, and to end with this. First of all, I don't think this is all so gloomy. I'm more on the side that I've seen worse, and I do recall much worse times in terms of how political parties function, in terms of how relations were. I don't think it's that horrible. There are horrible elements to where this country is going in socioeconomic terms, in demographic terms, and I agree completely with this. But let me just remind you of one very simple fact. While we have this conflict burning on the level of three ethnic groups in Bosnia, at the same time, Bosniaks and Croats, SDA and HDZ, function perfectly in the federal parliament when it comes to dividing the spoils, making usual appointments to one another. Dražen, I've seen it. You don't have to shake your head. I mean, trust me. The same thing goes with the Dodik, and if you look at the state level. When it comes to operationalizing, or when it comes to functional cooperation, which is about extracting public money into private pockets. And this is what the name of the game is.
You're right about it.
And the whole thing functions perfectly. It functions perfectly. There is right now we have a situation in the Federation where for 4 years we haven't had elections. We haven't had election results implemented. We have some form of caretaker government. But it functions still in terms of where the public enterprises are, who controls what, and the appointments.
Right.
This was never an issue.
Well, it's great to see that you have agreed on a few issues now. And before I return to the Q&A part, I would like to remind our participants that the keynote speakers were kind enough to prepare their views on these themes in writing that will be compiled and published as a separate document. So we will be able to learn about their positions in detail. And now I will give the floor to Keith McCormick and Q&A session.
Thank you, Biljana. And for everyone who's watching, you'll find in your screen a box to write your question, and I will then pose it to our speakers. And thank you to all three speakers for an extremely interesting and provocative debate. It's like being there in Bosnia, hearing these three perspectives. From my perspective, it's a little bit difficult today to focus on anything other than the death of the Queen and the passing of an entire era. But you've reminded us that there are a lot of places in the world that still require attention, sustained attention, which we're not good at, and very few more than Bosnia. So we have questions that have been entered, starting with one from Andre Goodfriend. He lives now in Cyprus, and he points out that the people there who once were a common ethnicity hundreds of years ago have divided themselves over the centuries, religion, language, and culture, into two nations and now two territories. And this doesn't seem to be getting better but worse with each passing year. So he wonders if the situation in Bosnia-Herzegovina is similar, and are the three communities growing further apart, and do they actually want to be together? Dr. Sajid, could we start with you?
Who
Who would
the
like
question
to?
is addressed to?
Nina, would you like to start? Give your thoughts first, and
Yeah,
perhaps all of you would speak to it if you would.
Well, I know that in Cyprus they're trying to have some kind of a federal model to have the power sharing, something similar that was done in Bosnia and Herzegovina. One needs to be very careful, especially knowing the fact that Cyprus is really divided. One part of the country is part of the EU, the other part, the government doesn't control the whole thing, and then you cannot compare. It's literally divided. When you look how the divisions, and it's divided between nations, ethnicities, if you like. I mean, Greeks and Turks, who have much less in common than we here in Bosnia and Herzegovina. At least we speak the same language, no matter how we call it. Okay, we don't, but we can understand each other the same way as Americans. In a way, we can understand each other, and it's completely different thing, and it's divided between two, so it's a little bit, the comparison is not the same. This country is composed of three nations, and it's true that maybe inter-ethnic relations on the surface have worsened, but I don't think that, as my colleagues have mentioned, that the situation will escalate. That I don't think that the situation. What we are having here? The biggest problem of Bosnia and Herzegovina is the fact that all three constituent peoples, that we don't agree, first of all, on how this country should look like. We agree, let's say majority of us agree, that we should have some kind of the EU future, but we don't agree upon how this country should look like, what it's structured, how it should be structured. And this is the biggest problem. You have in Bosnia and Herzegovina these two battling tendencies, one being attempts for further centralization, and then another attempt for decentralization. And I think that all what we have been seeing here is a part of that game. I don't know if I answered the question, but we can always compare, and we have seen that, and there are lessons to be learned, obviously. I don't know if your viewer probably knows, but for example, North Cyprus, right? North Cyprus has an embassy that has a full-fledged diplomatic status in Turkey, and it has North Cyprus carries out its own international relations, its own foreign policy. So this is something, and it has a couple of other. I'm not talking about representation offices, as for example the Republic of Srpska has, or for example as California has. This is like a full-fledged embassy in Turkey. We don't have that.
Adnan, how do you see that?
Well, I mean, I'm usually on the side of, seeing Bosnia as very much susceptible to the dynamics in the region. So if things begin to deteriorate, and especially if we see a serious global upset in the security sense, then I think that we don't know what future holds in store for Bosnia. Bosnia is in its fragility is somehow preserved by no matter how we see it, very filled with animosity, but still relatively stable regional situation. I mean, we don't have cases of serious deterioration into conflicts in the region, and I think that this is an important point. The same way I see Yugoslavia. I mean, if we see some major upset and reshuffle on the global scene, then I have no idea what's gonna happen. But I mean, this is not going to be a guarantee. There's not going to be a guarantee for any country in that sense. But other than that, I don't really see the situation in Bosnia as dramatic. I see it as dramatic in especially in socioeconomic and demographic sense. Unfortunately, we're losing people, and that's a process that cannot be stopped. And eventually, this is going to be country emptied of very potent young people, and will become kind of a retirement home. Probably settled by someone else, and that's what I see as future. In the middle of this, there is a scenario of some kind of very, very slow implosion, institutional implosion of Bosnia. Further deterioration of norms and disappearance of any trace of rule of law, which will end up with a situation of sort of cartelization, something similar to Mexico. So I don't know, honestly. I mean, the question is very broad, and I think there are far too many variables that we need to take into account when discussing this.
Jojen, do you think the communities are moving further apart, or do you think that maybe these mutual animosities are gradually fading as a new generation comes along?
Yeah, I think I mean, from what I have, like the screenings, public opinion analysis, and things like that, the relations between the relations are not good at all. But what I see as a major problem is not disagreement. I mean, Nina mentioned disagreements. We disagree on this, we disagree on that. That's all fine. What I see as a major problem is when you have two actors disagreeing of something, but not being able to come to an agreement by the means of discourse, by reasonable negotiation. Because one of the parties is really resistant to the negotiation attempts, or has lost the moral discursive status in the eyes of the other. The other, let's say you take me as a liar or as a promise breaker, then you will not engage in serious negotiations with me, and you will not attempt at reaching an agreement with me. Why? Because you don't trust me. For you, I am not a credible actor. That's the key issue. So we don't need to have like an overt violence, like a use of violent means, to have a kind of very serious political situation. And we have such major problems in Bosnia of today. I mean, when I hear Bakir Izetbegović, I mean, this guy is really like a warmongering actor. He's really resistant to all. He said, like in 2017, he said, Jović will not have an agreement with me on election issues. And today, that's the same, 2022. And he must be supported by somebody, because if there was some arm twisting directed at that guy by some major international actors, I think that he would have given in. So that's I'm simply telling you what I see and what is the case. So based on that, of course, the ethnicities are going further apart.
Well, given this, I wonder if you, all three of you, would advise Americans to be very careful about a politics of identity. Nina, how would you see that?
I'm always torn between two things. Trying to be very realistic, and then trying to see a positive aspect. When it comes to Bosnia and Herzegovina, we are all really champions of negative branding. And we should really be given a Nobel Prize for that. Just look at the interethnic conflicts, the real conflicts. When I say the conflicts, the attacks in Bosnia and Herzegovina over the 5 years since maybe we think that the situation deteriorated. It's very difficult to compare with the situation in America, but you have more interracial, attacks or, incidents, even percentage-wise, and I'm talking about absolute numbers, than we have here. In any other European countries, there are incidents of that nature, but this is here. It's always the focus on Bosnia and Herzegovina, that the situation is very bad, that nothing is functioning. And it's true, we have a brain drain. We have a brain drain in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but so does the Croatia, so does Serbia, so does Slovenia. Doctors from Bosnia and Herzegovina go to work in Slovenia. Slovenian doctors go to work to Germany. German doctors go to work in the United States. That's how it goes. I'm not trying to simplify the things, but, this is and so what? So if somebody comes, so if we change a little bit, if we have some, I think that the biggest problem with this negative branding of Bosnia and Herzegovina is that we don't have, for example, as many as US companies coming to Bosnia and Herzegovina, because we are, we don't have them. We have, and then we are being accused. No, I'm just saying, and then we are being accused, especially we in the Republic of Srpska, of being under the Russian or Chinese influence, but the Russian and Chinese company, but the Russian and Chinese companies want to work in the Republic of Srpska. If the Americans, if some of the Americans, we are really welcome, and would be happy to have them. But as much as when you're trying to impose certain rules of the game, and then on the other hand you don't respect it yourself, and I have just briefly mentioned, I thought that maybe Dražen or Adnan would say a little bit more. We have evidence to suggest that there is a huge element of the corruption within the international community. Dražen was working for the OHR. He's social.
Don't do it. No, don't take me as an example. I mean, it's really.
No. Okay. I will stop.
There. Don't put thoughts in my head or words in my mouth.
No. I'm not doing that. I'm just saying. I'm just saying that
I will say my.
One person at a time, please.
Thank you.
Yeah, Nina.
Okay, Dražen, please, because you're trying to. I haven't finished my thoughts, so please go ahead.
I just wanted to say, don't put words into my mouth. Don't put thoughts into my head. That was not my
intention.
It's not.
No, I didn't.
I don't care about. I work for the OHR, so what? Yeah. No,
that was not my intention. That was not my intention. But okay, whatever.
Adnan, maybe we could ask you. The question was about the politics of identity, and has it gotten too negative? Is this negative view itself a big part of what's holding Bosnia back? Or is it just realism?
As I said earlier, no, yes, the Bosnian problem, all the problems we've been discussing here are not virtual problems, they are real problems. It's not like we're trying to invent issues to argue about. There are so many unresolved issues we had to deal with, sometimes under the pressure of international community, but to no avail. All of these discussions were futile. I think because there was really no commitment to resolve this. And I think there is plenty of empirical evidence to suggest that actually the lack of agreement on a number of sides actually benefits all three sides equally. I'm talking about political elites in particular. And we should not forget the fact that underneath all this, while we speak, what is happening is a widespread plunder of public resources. And this is something that is just happening in absolutely every element of Bosnian administrative and governance system. Public procurement system is seen by Transparency International as completely corrupt, and the procedures as completely discredited. We're talking about billions of km annually, up to 3.5. So these are the issues. And you know, when you ask people who are leaving the country, and as I said, I'm not saying that the issues we're discussing here are non-existent, but when you ask people why are they leaving, they will give you several reasons. They will say, hey, I don't like it here. I don't like this atmosphere. I don't like the value system of this country. I don't like the way the things are being debated and discussed. This country has no future, and I'm looking for something better for my children. I have friends who have left in their 40s, who have left with the whole families, basically uprooted and left for European Union. So these are, I have several cases around me. People who were situated, people who had jobs, not menial jobs really, but really good jobs. And I think, you know, it's really hard to refocus on these issues if we constantly invoke the issue of identity, which is deliberately not being resolved.
Well, I'm struck that all three of you have stressed the importance of good governance and the importance of getting a handle on corruption. It's pretty clear message you're giving. We have time for maybe one more question, I think, and that's from Robert Sorensen, who asks, would greater EU integration, greater integration with the European Union, be able to form a sort of overarching structure that would provide greater security to all three constituent peoples, and then let them get closer to working compromises? And if so, how could we accelerate that? Nina, how would you see that? We have only time for a short answer.
We basically covered that question. You know, the Constitution of Bosnia and Herzegovina does provide enough space for everything to be done within the EU integration process. We don't have to go far away. We can do what Belgium is doing and how Belgium is doing, you know, how they coordinate between Flanders and Wallonia and French-speaking community. You know, in countries like Canada, you know, Quebec has a right, for example, if Canada signs a treaty, if Quebec, if there is a competencies that fall under Quebec's jurisdiction, Quebec is not, and if he doesn't agree with it, Quebec is not supposed to implement it. I'm trying to simplify. There is a
positive examples. Thank you for that. Dražen, a quick comment on the EU greater
EU integration. No, it's first there are some requirements for the EU integration. One is that the country should run itself. This means like the dismissal of the High Representative, and this will never happen as long as the United States has any influence on the Bosnia-Herzegovina affairs. And the second is change to the constitution, having a much stronger central government than is the case now. Now, given the Serb or Republika Srpska interests, I don't think this will happen. So I don't think that the Serbs will provide more powers to the central level, because they were already taken so many powers were already taken from the entity level and brought up to the central level. So I don't think that's look at the European Union itself, who would, you know, and also, you know, Groucho Marx said famously, you know, I wouldn't join the club who would have me as a member. So that's
we are out of time, I'm afraid, but just a very quick comment, Adnan, before we turn it back to Susan Johnson.
Okay, so very briefly, I think that the leverage is largely lost, especially the EU's leverage here, not only in Bosnia, but in the region as well. I think we have a problem with the commitment, even though Nina said that we are kind of agreed on that. We agree that there is a general consensus on the future of this country in the EU. In terms of materialization, nothing really happens. So I think that, you know, honestly, as far as the political elites are concerned, I don't think this is their goal. There were some, you know, minor things they could have done, several laws to be adopted, really, none of which ever materialized. So, you know, I think this is a clear signal that these people are not interested in this process.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to turn the floor back to Susan Johnson.
Well, thank you, Keith. And Keith disappeared from the screen and I was expecting to still see him. But anyway, I wanted to thank Keith and first of all, thank our three panelists because I've been really impressed with, despite the different perspectives and views and a few areas of agreement, the quality of your discussion. And so kudos to all of you. And I'd also like to commend Biljana for the courage of, taking on bringing these three folk together on this difficult topic. It certainly did take me back 10 years to when I was supervisor in Birchco District, except a little worse. And there were a lot of things that it stimulated me to think about again that I'd tried to thrust out of my thought. So maybe we can have another panel at some point that can focus a little bit on how structures incentivize and disincentivize human behavior and lead to better or worse results. But the conversation or the discussion really brought to mind to me a saying of former Secretary Shultz, who is my favorite Secretary of State, and you see how far I have to go back. But he said that trust is key to deal making. When trust is in the room, whichever room you're talking about at whatever level, good things happen. When it's not, good things don't happen. And building trust means, on the one hand, humanizing the other. It means, gets back to some of the values that some of you mentioned. And so the question to me remains for the future, how can we build trust, not just in Bosnia-Herzegovina, but elsewhere in the world, both internally and externally, because I think that's a real problem that we are all, humankind is facing right now. And if we don't figure it out, it may cost us a lot. So the question for you all, and I wrestle with it, and maybe a future discussion can focus on what are really practical ways of building trust in other people that we have to deal with, because we won't deal and we won't compromise if we don't trust the other party. And I think Dražen was talking about that. So that's sort of what I come away with. And I don't know if that's a positive or kind of a gloomy thing. But again, I want to thank all of you and thank our audience and Keith and Biljana for bringing you all together. And I look forward to reading now your written submissions after I've heard this discussion. So thank you all, and I think that brings us to a close just 3 minutes after 1.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, I don't know, Dražen, if you wanted to say something else.
Yeah, it seems that we are getting turned off.
I don't know whether we are now just panelists or whether our audience has been turned
I just
off.
wanted to say, I 100% I agree with Adnan on the corrupt politicians.
Yes.
It's really, but the corrupt politicians are really just the downside to this war-like atmosphere that we have in the country. But he is absolutely sure. And I agree, all the three parties, all the three nationalities are really, deplorable in that regard. We are simply, including Mile Dodik, including Bakir Izetbegović, including Jović. It's just, cynical politicians. And they think only of the issue of branding. And that's what I actually disliked about Nina's intervention. It's not the branding, it's reality. We need to face the reality. We don't need to present ourselves. We are really bad and in a bad position.
You're not so
election
bad.
change
I like
anything?
you all, despite the difficulty.
Thank you.
And
for the
I
invite.
look forward to coming back to Bosnia and maybe some follow-on program at some point.
Yeah.
And my fingers crossed for these elections.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, it will get worse. It will slip away.
Okay, thank you all.
Yes.
Thank you, guys.
Okay.
Nina,
Bye.
Nina, ciao.
Bye-bye.
Ciao, pozdrav. Čuvaj se.
Pozdrav.
Loš mi je zvuk.
Yeah.
Imam